The rain came down without mercy. Serena Cole stood at the base of the marble steps of the Reyes estate, both hands wrapped around the handle of a worn leather suitcase. Her white dress was soaked through. Her long chestnut hair clung to her pale, tear-stained face. She did not wipe her eyes. What was the point? The rain replaced the tears faster than her hands ever could. Behind her, the iron and glass front doors opened. Damian Reyes walked into the storm without flinching. No coat. No urgency. No guilt. He stood in a black suit that not even the downpour could dismantle, 6 feet of cold authority and absolute silence. I told you to be out by midnight, he said quietly. He never raised his voice. That was always the most terrifying part of him. Serena turned to face him. Her swollen, red-rimmed eyes swept across his face one final, desperate time, searching for one crack. One flicker of something human. She found nothing. Her free hand drifted, slowly, instinctively, to rest against her stomach. She had rehearsed the words 10,000 times. Damian. Stop. There's something you need to know. He glanced at his watch. The car is waiting. Serena Cole swallowed the truth. Picked up her suitcase. And walked alone into the rain, carrying a secret that would one day bring this man completely to his knees. 3 hours before the rain. The argument had not been loud. That was the worst part. Serena had been standing in the center of the living room when Damian walked in carrying the photograph. He placed it on the glass coffee table, face up, deliberate, the way he laid evidence before men he was about to have dealt with, and simply looked at her. The photograph showed her meeting a man outside a downtown restaurant. Smiling. Leaning in close to speak. Explain it, Damian said. Serena felt her heart collapse. That's my cousin, she said. David. I've told you about him. His wife just had a baby Anne. I had him checked. His voice was glacial. David Cole. No criminal record. No association with any rival family. I know exactly who he is. Then why? Because you met him without telling me. His black eyes were perfectly steady. In this world, secrets are weapons. You know the rules. Damian, I forgot to mention a lunch with my cousin. That is not a betrayal. I've made my decision. The words landed like a sentence handed down in a courtroom. Final. Irrevocable. Damian, please. Just listen to me. Please. Marco will have your things packed within the hour. Something shattered inside Serena, not loudly, not with screaming or rage. Just a quiet, internal collapse, like a building losing the one beam that held everything upright. She stood perfectly still while the world fell down around her. She thought about the small white stick in her bathroom drawer. The appointment card from Dr. Lena Marsh, dated 3 days ago. The tiny flutter of a heartbeat she had heard for the very first time in a sterile examination room, squeezing her own hand in the silence. She had come home that afternoon rehearsing the exact words. Damian. Sit down. I need to tell you something. She had even smiled to herself in the car, stupidly, dangerously, imagining that the news might soften something in him. That it might reach through the armor and touch whatever was still human underneath. And now he was standing here looking at her like she was a security threat. There's something I need to tell you, she said quietly. There is nothing you need to say. Damian. I said there is nothing. He turned to the window. His back to her now, broad shoulders, perfect posture, absolute dismissal. You have 1 hour. I'll have you driven wherever you need to go. Serena looked at the back of his head. At the set of his jaw. At the man who controlled entire states from this room and could not, would not, allow himself to be wrong for 60 seconds. The words died in her throat. She turned away. Walked up the stairs. Closed herself inside their bedroom for the last time. Sat on the edge of the bed. Pressed her palm flat against her abdomen. I'm sorry, she whispered. Not to him. To the life growing quietly inside her, the life he had just unknowingly expelled from his world before it had spoken a single word, before it had drawn a single breath, before it had ever been given the chance to make him understand what he was throwing away. The motel smelled like old cigarettes and forgotten people. Serena sat on the edge of a narrow bed at 2 in the morning, still in her damp dress, suitcase unopened at her feet. The rain tapped against the thin window. The heater in the corner wheezed and clicked. She stared at the water stains on the ceiling and tried to remember how to breathe. She had her wallet. Her personal phone, paid under her own name, separate from any accounts Damian's people managed. Her identification. The appointment card from Dr. Marsh. And the test. She took it from her purse. Looked at it. 2 pink lines in the fluorescent motel light. She had carried it around for 3 days like evidence of something she didn't know how to present. Now she turned it slowly in her fingers, and for the first time since she'd seen those lines, she allowed herself to fully understand what they meant. She placed her hand over her stomach. Nothing was visible yet. Barely 8 weeks. Just a heartbeat the size of a hummingbird wing. Just a secret that could have changed everything, if she had been braver. If he had been quieter. If the photograph had never appeared on that coffee table. But it had. And he had made his decision before she opened her mouth. Serena turned off the light and lay in the dark. She made herself 3 promises before sleep came. 1, she would not call him. 2, she would not allow anyone connected to his world to find her. 3, this child would never know what it felt like to be dismissed before it was given a chance. In the morning, she was sick for the first time, bent over the cracked bathroom sink at 6 a.m., one hand braced against the tile, the other pressed to her mouth. When it passed, she straightened up. Looked at herself in the mirror. Her eyes were dry. Her jaw was set. She looked nothing like the woman who had cried in the rain. Over the following weeks, Serena rebuilt herself with nothing but quiet determination and careful intelligence. She found a small furnished apartment in a town 4 hours east. She paid the first month's rent in cash. She found a cafe that needed morning help and took the shift. She located a low-cost women's health clinic 3 blocks from her front door and scheduled her first prenatal visit under a different last name. She did not call her sister. Did not call her mother. Did not contact anyone who might accidentally breathe a word to anyone connected to the name Reyes. She ate. She rested. She talked to the baby in the quiet of the apartment each night, softly, carefully, like whispering a bedtime story to someone who could only half hear her. "You are the only thing that is entirely mine," she whispered one evening, lying on her side with one hand resting over the still secret swell of her abdomen. "And nobody is going to take you from me. Not the world. Not him." Outside, the city moved on, indifferent and relentless. Inside that small apartment, a woman who had been thrown away was learning, slowly and painfully and beautifully, how to be unbreakable. Damian Reyes did not grieve. He did not grieve because there was nothing to grieve. He had made a rational decision based on available evidence and enforced it without sentiment. That was what men like him did. That was precisely how men like him survived to see 40. By the morning after she left, the Reyes estate had been fully returned to its previous order. Her things cleared from the master bedroom. Her chair at the dining table reset. Her name unspoken. Damian threw himself back into his empire with total mechanical efficiency. Territories to manage. A supply chain disruption. 3 meetings in 48 hours. A conference with the Vargas family in Monterrey requiring his personal composure. He gave all of it flawlessly. His Lieutenant Marco clapped him on the shoulder on the 3rd day. "She was a liability from the beginning, Patron. You already know that." Damian nodded once. Said nothing. That night, he walked through the house alone. He didn't intend to pass the kitchen. He was heading for the study. But the hallway curved past the kitchen doorway and as he passed it, he stopped. Her coffee mug, pale blue with a small chip on the handle, was still sitting on the second shelf. Elena hadn't noticed it. Or had been too careful to remove it without being told. Damian stared at the mug for a moment longer than was necessary. He thought about telling Elena to dispose of it. He didn't. He walked on. In the study, he poured 2 fingers of aged mezcal and stood at the window looking out at the grounds. The stone steps. The wet cobblestones, still dark from rain 2 nights ago. He replayed the conversation with the precision of a man reviewing security footage. Looking for the moment the threat had appeared. Looking for the confirmation that his decision had been correct. She had said, "There's something I need to tell you." He had said, "There is nothing you need to say." He hadn't thought about that exchange since it left his mouth. Now, standing at the window with a drink he wasn't tasting, it sat differently. Angled in a way he didn't like. She had looked strange in that moment. Not guilty strange. Not defensive. Something else entirely. Something quiet and frightened that he had not bothered to name. She had touched her stomach. He remembered that now. Briefly. The way her hand had moved, slowly, privately, like something she hadn't intended. He told himself it was nothing. A nervous habit. A dramatic gesture from a woman who had failed to meet his standard of transparency. He finished his drink. He went to bed. He did not sleep. In the darkness he saw her face, red-rimmed eyes, searching, devastated, and for the first time since she walked out that door, he felt something cold and unwelcome move through his chest. Not regret. Not yet. But the very first, faint, impossible to silence whisper of a question he was not ready to ask. What was she trying to tell me? He pressed it down. Closed his eyes. Forced his breathing steady. He didn't ask it again. Not that night. Serena was 5 months along when the baby kicked for the first time. She was wiping down the espresso machine during a slow Tuesday afternoon when it happened, small and unmistakable, like a flutter of wings pressed against the inside of a drum. She stopped. Pressed her hand to the side of her belly. Waited. It came again. Her eyes filled immediately, embarrassingly, right there behind the counter. She turned away before her coworker could notice. "You okay?" Jana called from the back. "Fine," Serena managed. "Something in my eye." She was not fine. She was standing in a stranger's cafe in a town where nobody knew her full name, 4 months removed from the most devastating night of her life, and the child that nobody knew existed had just moved for the very first time. She pressed her lips together. Held the feeling. Let it settle somewhere deep and permanent. By now her body had changed visibly. The soft swell beneath her apron was obvious to anyone who looked closely, and the people of this small town were kind enough to look only briefly and say nothing intrusive. She had told Jana she was a single mother. Jana had squeezed her hand and said quietly, "The strong ones always are." Serena had not cried at that. She had smiled, genuinely, fully, for the first time in months. The cafe work was not glamorous. $8 tips and sore feet and a schedule posted late every Friday. The apartment had no dishwasher and one unreliable radiator that clanked through the night. The free clinic visits were long and sometimes cold in the small, quiet ways that free things could be. None of it broke her. What almost broke her were the nights. The nights when the apartment went too quiet and the baby was still and she lay awake doing what she had promised herself she would not do, wondering. Wondering if he had thought about her. Wondering if he had ever paused, even once, and asked himself what she had been trying to say. She had searched his name online 4 times in the first month. Each time she had closed the browser before the results loaded. On the 5th time, she deleted the browser entirely. She would not build her child's life on the foundation of waiting for a man to care. She enrolled in an online bookkeeping course. Paid for with cafe tips and the small emergency account she had always kept separate, long before she ever understood why she would need it. She read to the baby every evening. Short stories. Poetry. Sometimes simply the news read aloud in a calm, steady voice, because she had read somewhere that babies in the womb recognized patterns, and she wanted the first pattern her child learned to be the sound of a mother who was not afraid. She was afraid, of course. Every single night. But she read anyway. And 4 months after walking into the rain with a suitcase and a secret, Serena Cole was, against every reasonable expectation, against the grinding weight of loneliness and uncertainty and medical bills and aching feet, still standing. Still standing and growing something extraordinary. It was Elena who finally moved the blue coffee mug. 4 months after Serena left, Damian walked into the kitchen and the shelf was bare. He stood there a moment longer than necessary, then turned and said nothing. Elena, watching from the hallway, said softly, "I can put it back, Mr. Reyes." "Don't," he said. And walked away. That same afternoon, for reasons he did not examine too closely, he went upstairs to the room that had been hers before whatever they were became too undeniable to pretend otherwise. The guest suite. The room completely cleared and remade by housekeeping weeks ago. He pushed the door open. Stood in the doorway. Cream walls. Fresh linens. A room that could have belonged to anyone or no one. He walked in anyway. He opened the closet. Empty. Closed it. He walked to the small writing desk near the window. Opened the top drawer on instinct. Also empty, except for a single notebook. Small, pale green, cracked spine. Clearly missed in the cleanout. He should have called Elena. He opened the notebook instead. It was not a diary. It was not organized. It was her handwriting, fast, looping, underlined in places, notes, observations, fragments. Half the pages were random, grocery lists, book titles, sentences she had apparently loved enough to copy down. And then, halfway through, page after page of observations about him. Not surveillance. Not intelligence gathering. Observations. The kind made by a person paying close attention because they genuinely wanted to understand someone, the real way, the private way, the way that had nothing to do with power. He checks the security cameras at 11 p.m. every night before bed. He thinks no one notices. Everyone notices. He ate the entire plate of food I made, the dish my mother taught me, without saying a word. Then he washed the plate himself and put it back in the cabinet. He has never done that. I watched from the hallway. He didn't know I was there. He said, I don't celebrate birthdays, like it was a company policy. 3 days later I found a photograph of a birthday cake folded inside his desk drawer. Same date every year. His mother's. Damian sat down on the edge of the desk. He read for a long time. When he reached the final written entry, dated 2 days before she left, the muscles of his chest locked tight. I have something to tell him tomorrow. Something I am terrified to say. Something I'm even more terrified not to say. I think it might change things. I think this might be the thing that finally reaches him, really reaches him, past all of it. Or it might be the thing that makes him close off completely. I don't know which man will be standing there when I speak. I'm going to tell him anyway. Damian closed the notebook. He set it on the desk with extraordinary care, the way a person sets down something fragile they had not known was fragile until it was already in their hands. For the first time since she left, the question he had buried returned, not as a whisper. As a verdict. What was she trying to tell me? Damian gave Marco a single instruction. Find out where she is. Quietly. Marco blinked. Serena. You have 48 hours. Marco returned in 36. She's gone completely dark, Patron. No cards used under her name. Her number disconnected. She didn't go to her family. I confirmed her mother's address. No contact since she left here. No new lease in the city. No traceable employment. She's genuinely off the grid. Damian absorbed this in silence. She had help from someone, he asked. None that I can trace. She did it herself. Marco hesitated. It appears so. Damian dismissed him and sat alone at his desk. A woman with no criminal background, no underground network, no established evasion resources, had simply vanished. That did not happen by accident. That happened when someone was deeply, deliberately, absolutely motivated to disappear. When someone was running from something and intended never to be found. He pulled the pale green notebook from his desk drawer. Read her last entry for the 9th time. I don't know which man will be standing there when I speak. That evening, Elena appeared in the doorway holding a small cardboard box. Forgive me, Mr. Reyes. The final clean-out from the guest room. I was going to leave it in storage, but I thought you should look through it first. She set it on his desk and left. He looked inside. A book. A small appointment card, Dr. Lena Marsh, OBGYN, with an address printed beneath the name. And a folded pharmacy receipt. OBGYN. The air in the room shifted. He picked up the receipt. Scanned the date, 4 days before she left. His eyes moved down the itemized list. Prenatal vitamins. And one other item. 4 words printed in standard pharmaceutical font that turned the entire world, quietly, completely, catastrophically, upside down. Pregnancy test. Quantity, 1. He set the receipt down with absolute, deliberate precision. He did not move for a long time. Then he stood and walked to the window and looked out at the same stone steps she had stood on in the rain. The same cobblestones. The same place where she had turned to face him with swollen eyes and pressed her hand, slowly, instinctively, against her stomach. Damian. Stop. There's something you need to know. There is nothing you need to say. The car is waiting. He had looked at his watch. He had looked at his watch and said the car is waiting while she stood in the rain, carrying his child, gathering the last fragments of her courage, and he had turned his back. He pressed his palm flat against the cold glass of the window. He had accused her of a secret. She had been keeping one. Not to protect herself. To protect something far more precious, something she had come home that day specifically to share with him, and had left instead carrying alone into the dark because he had not given her 60 seconds of silence in which to speak. Somewhere out there, hidden and alone, Serena Cole was surviving the aftermath of his arrogance. And it was possible, terrifyingly, devastatingly possible, that she was doing it while carrying his child. He found the ultrasound inside the back cover of the book. A single folded image, glossy, clinical, the date printed in small type at the bottom corner. 8 weeks and 3 days. He did the math. She had been carrying his child the night he sent her away in the rain. She had been standing on those marble steps, soaked through, shaking, gripping a suitcase, and she had already known. She had known for days. She had come home that afternoon with that knowledge trembling on her lips, had stood in the living room and tried to speak, and he had placed a photograph on a table and sentenced her before she could form a complete sentence. Damian set the ultrasound on his desk. He was not a man given to collapse. He had constructed, over decades and with extraordinary deliberate effort, an internal architecture designed to prevent it. Walls within walls. Compartments sealed like vaults. A discipline of emotional silence so complete it had become indistinguishable from his actual character. Those walls held for approximately 4 minutes. Then something in his chest, structural, ancient, load-bearing, gave way without a sound. He pressed his hands flat against the desk. Breathed through it. Focused on a fixed point on the wall. Kept his face still. His jaw locked so hard it ached. He picked up his phone. Called her number. This number has been disconnected. He called Dr. Lena Marsh's office. The receptionist told him, with careful professional distance, that patient records were entirely confidential. He called 3 more times. On the 4th attempt, the doctor picked up and said very quietly, "Mr. Reyes. I strongly advise you to consult legal counsel before proceeding further. I cannot confirm or share any patient information. But I will tell you this, she left this city deliberately and carefully, and whatever she chose to protect, you should respect that decision." The line went dead. He sat in his office until 2 in the morning. He was not thinking about his empire. Not about territory or the Vargas family or supply routes or any of the machinery that had consumed his entire adult life. He was thinking about a woman carrying his child, alone in a city he didn't know, in an apartment without security or medical support or anyone who knew her full history, and every single one of those facts was the direct, measurable consequence of 10 seconds of cold arrogance. She had not defended herself that night. He had read it as guilt. Now he understood it for what it actually was, devastation. The specific, wordless devastation of a woman who had come home carrying the most important news of her life and watched the man she loved hand down a verdict before she could speak a single word. He looked at the ultrasound one final time. The tiny shape. The measurements. The heartbeat recorded in clinical data as though it were an ordinary thing. His. He pushed back from the desk. Stood. Walked to the door of the study. Marco. His voice was completely even. Every resource we have. Every contact. Every favor outstanding. She is somewhere in this country and I want her found. I don't care what it costs. I don't care how long it takes. Find her. The most feared man in 3 states could not find one woman. For 6 weeks, Damian Reyes operated on 3 hours of sleep and total obsession. He deployed every resource his network possessed. Private investigators. Eyes at bus terminals, train stations, highway rest stops. Contacts at hospitals and women's clinics across 4 states. Every favor owed across a decade of criminal empire, called in, exhausted, discarded. Nothing. She had disappeared like smoke, methodically, intelligently, without leaving a single thread he could pull. He stood in his office one night staring at the map pinned to his wall, marked cities, confirmed clears, swept regions, and felt something he had not felt since he was 12 years old, standing in a hospital corridor watching his father walk away without turning back. Complete powerlessness. Damian Reyes controlled men. He controlled borders and money and silence and fear. He had never in his adult life stood helpless before something he wanted and could not reach. He had been walking past her blue coffee mug every morning since Elena had reinstated it to the shelf without being asked. He had said nothing. He did not examine why he said nothing. He began replaying every shared memory with the cold precision of a man reviewing misread evidence. Looking for the data points he had failed to process correctly. Looking for the moments he had seen her and chosen not to actually look. There were too many. The morning she had said across the breakfast table, "You never have to be alone, you know." He had answered without lifting his eyes from his phone. Something dismissive. She had gone quiet. The night 3 weeks before she left, when he had found her crying silently at the window at 2 a.m. and asked what was wrong, and she had said nothing, and he had accepted it without question because it required no further action from him. The afternoon she had spent 3 hours making a dish her mother had taught her. He had eaten it in silence at the head of that long table. Had never once asked what it was or why she had made it. He had lived beside her for 2 years. He had never once stopped to truly see her. His people finally traced her through a pharmacy in a small eastern city. She had used her real name on a prescription refill, prenatal vitamins. The pharmacist had noted she was visibly pregnant and asked if she needed a referral. The record surfaced in a database sweep his investigator ran on a Tuesday evening. Damian had the address within 48 hours. He sat in his car outside the building on a gray morning looking up at a second-floor window. Behind the glass, a shadow moved through a small apartment. Unhurried. Alive. He did not go up immediately. He sat with both hands on the wheel for 40 minutes. Trying to find words that would begin to address what he had done. Trying to construct something that sounded like accountability from a man who had never once been required to offer it. He found nothing adequate. He never would. He got out of the car anyway. She opened the door in a gray cardigan and socks. For one fractured second, neither of them moved. Serena looked different. Softer around the face. Heavier in the luminous way of late pregnancy, her bright skin somehow even more radiant against the dim hallway light. Her hair was pulled back loosely. Small shadows lived beneath her eyes. She looked at him. Then she tried to close the door. His hand caught it. Please. One word. Offered by a man who had never in his life used it sincerely. No, she said. Her voice was completely steady. Steelier than he'd expected. You don't get to come here. Serena. How did you find me? It doesn't matter. It absolutely matters. Her grip on the door tightened. I was careful. I did everything right. I did everything. Her voice fractured for one brief second. She pulled it back together with visible effort. Leave. Please. I know about the baby, he said. She went completely still. 3 seconds of absolute silence in the hallway, just the distant hum of a neighbor's television, the soft wheeze of the building's heating. Then Serena's expression changed, not into tears, not into fury. Into something far more devastating than both. A slow, exhausted resignation that weighed more than anything else she could have shown him. Good, she said quietly. Then you know. Now leave. Serena. What do you want from me, Damian? An apology for not telling you? For not saying it while you were already deciding I was a liability? Her voice was low, precise, and devastating in its control. I was going to tell you. I came home that day with that one piece of news. I had it planned. I was terrified and I was ready. And you put a photograph on the table and handed down a sentence before I could form a single sentence in response. She exhaled slowly. I did not owe you that truth after what you did. Not in that moment. He looked past her into the apartment. Second-hand furniture. Bare walls. A small folded crib in the corner, assembled with care, each bar checked and secure. Medical forms stacked neatly on the kitchen counter. A glass of water with a prenatal vitamin beside it. The life she had built from absolutely nothing, after he had taken everything. Something inside him, hard, cold, impenetrable, decades in the construction, did not crumble. It simply ceased to exist. I was wrong, he said. Yes, she said. You were. I want to be here. You don't get everything you want, Damian. I know that's unfamiliar. I am not leaving. She looked at him, this cold, impossible man standing in her second-hand hallway with nothing to offer except the shattered wreckage of his arrogance, and something moved in her eyes. Not forgiveness. Not even close to that yet. Not warmth. But something. Recognition, perhaps. Of the cost written on his face. You can't come in, she said. I'll stay in the hall. She studied him for a long moment. Then she stepped back and closed the door. Damian Reyes lowered himself slowly to the floor of that hallway. Sat with his back against her door. Jacket folded beneath him. And he stayed. At 2:47 in the morning, he heard her gasp. He had fallen asleep against her door, back against the wood, jacket beneath him, when the sound cut through the silence and brought him instantly, completely awake. He was on his feet before he understood that he'd moved. He knocked once. Serena. Silence. Then a sharp, caught breath. He didn't knock again. He tried the handle. She hadn't locked it. He pushed it open. She was in the center of the living room, one hand flat against the wall, the other pressed to her abdomen, bent slightly forward. Her face was white. Her legs were shaking visibly. How far apart, he said immediately. She shook her head. It's too early. 34 weeks, it's not. How far apart, Serena? She looked at him. 7 minutes. But I felt something else. Something that doesn't feel right. He was already at her side. One arm around her. Phone in his other hand. I'm calling an ambulance. I can walk to the car. You cannot walk. He looked directly at her, steady, no room for argument. Let me do this one thing right. Please. She searched his face. She let him hold her up. The ambulance arrived in 4 minutes. At the hospital, they separated her from him at the double doors, family only, and without a moment's hesitation, without a single calculation, Damian said, I'm the father. They let him through. For the next 3 hours, Damian Reyes sat in a hallway smelling of antiseptic under humming fluorescent lights and he did not move. He made no calls. He managed nothing. Controlled nothing. Calculated nothing. He sat. He waited. He pressed his clasped hands to his mouth and stared at the floor and asked something, from whatever remained of the faith his mother had tried to build in him before the world had taken her away, that she would be okay. That they would both be okay. That he had not arrived too late to matter. A nurse appeared at 5:52 a.m. Mr. Reyes. She was smiling. Just slightly. Your son is here. He stood up slowly. His legs were unsteady in a way that had nothing to do with exhaustion. They led him down the corridor to the room. Serena was propped against the pillows, pale, depleted, luminous with the specific exhaustion of a woman who had just done the most difficult thing a human body can do entirely on her own terms. She was looking down at the small bundled weight in her arms with an expression Damian had no language for. He stopped in the doorway. She looked up. Neither of them spoke. He walked in the way a man enters a place he knows he has no automatic right to enter, slowly, without assumption, without performance. He sat in the chair beside her bed. His name is Eli, she said quietly. He looked at the baby. At the miniature face. The tiny curled hands. Eli, he repeated. As though it were a word from another language, one he was only now beginning to learn. He looked at her. I'm sorry, Serena. The words came from somewhere deeper than strategy. Deeper than pride. From whatever remained of the man beneath the empire. I am so sorry. She looked at Eli for a long, quiet moment. I know, she said. She did not say it was forgiven. She did not say it was okay. But she shifted, just slightly, so that there was room beside her on the narrow hospital bed. She did not ask him to take it. She simply left it open. And in that small, devastated, achingly uncertain space, Damian Reyes understood, for the first time in his life, what it meant to be offered something he had not earned and could not control. Not redemption. Not yet. Just the chance, trembling and fragile and entirely unguaranteed, to become worthy of what still remained. There is a particular kind of cruelty that does not shout or threaten. It simply decides, coldly, efficiently, without looking back, and walks away before the damage has finished landing. Damian Reyes was not a villain in the traditional sense. He was a man taught from the very beginning that survival required silence. That love was a liability. That control was the only language worth trusting. He had built an empire on those beliefs and called it strength. And in one cold, arrogant moment, one glance at a watch, one sentence about a waiting car, he destroyed what could have been everything. But the real tragedy was never his cruelty. It was his silence in the aftermath. Because the moment Serena turned and walked into the rain, she did not give up on love. She gave up on him, and chose instead to love something more important. Herself. Her child. The quiet, unwitnessed courage of a woman who kept breathing, kept standing, kept building, not because anyone was watching, but because a life depended on her to be strong. This story belongs to everyone who has ever swallowed a truth because someone cut them off before they could speak. To everyone who rebuilt alone, in silence, without applause. And to everyone who has learned, the hardest way, that some doors, once closed with cruelty, cannot simply be reopened with regret. Sometimes the price of dismissing someone you love is watching them become everything, without you. And knowing, fully and finally, that you are the reason why.